And today we have an opportunity to speak to a very educated woman, a very experienced woman, and actually a woman who shares a lot of similarities to me in many ways. We're from the same area-ish. I'm from right outside of Philadelphia, and she is from West Philadelphia, so I may claim where she's from, but she may not give me the right to do that. So I'm excited to finally meet you. I've been reading your book a lot over the past couple of weeks, and it feels like I've met you before, but this is the first time that we've officially met. So today we have Miss Theresa Brown here. Is today your first time at Sankofa, or have you?
No, it's not my first time at Sankofa.
Well, welcome back.
Thank you so much.
It's always a pleasure to have authors come in and just share their experiences, and we get to dissect their art and how they've been able to change the world with the things that they produce. And so, just to get into a little bit of Miss Brown's bio, her background. Theresa Brown worked as a broadcast journalist from 1970 to 1990 in markets of Philadelphia, Hartford, and New York. She established the consumer desk at KYW All News Radio in Philadelphia. Brown was a general assignment reporter at WPIX TV in New York. She was host of the live daily talk show This Morning on New England Journal, WFSB TV, Hartford co-host, Hartford, Connecticut, Evening Magazine, KYW TV co-host, Saturday AM Live with Bill Boggs, Metro Media, NYC. She has a BA in journalism from Michigan State, an MA in cinema studies from NYU, and a JD from UDC, also located here in DC. So, as you can see, you obviously have a lot of experience. I'm only on my first degree, still trying to get that BA, and I can say it's not easy. So,
That's the hardest one.
Is it?
Yeah, I found.
So, could you share with me a little bit about your experience, through education, and you've been to a lot of different schools. You've been able to absorb some different cultures. UDC is the HBCU.
Mm-hmm.
Michigan State and NYU are not HBCUs.
Mm-hmm.
So, can you just share a little bit about your college days and how that has brought you here today?
Certainly. It's a pleasure meeting you, and it's a pleasure being here. I've been looking forward to it. I must say, I wrote this book for women, and I was very excited to start my talk by saying, I'm so happy to be here for the women I actually wrote the book for, but I only see a couple of women, so I hope you men will bear with me. As far as my college experiences, Michigan State, NYU, and David A. Clark School of Law, University of the District of Columbia. When I first went off to college at Michigan State was a Big Ten school, and I had been very serious about studying. And when I first got there, the first year I made the dean's list. So I never opened another book. I don't remember opening another book. All I did was party. I pledged, I became an AKA. I was an Omega Sweetheart, which is one of my proudest accomplishments. And Michigan State, the Black people who were there were about 300 of us, 300 to 500 in a campus of about 35,000. We formed a Black microcosm. Social life was all Black. When I first got there, I had a white roommate. She became hysterical. Her parents moved her out. And that's pretty much all I can say about my Michigan State days. My proudest degree was NYU because that was civil studies, and it's you can't really do much with it except teach it. So it was just like education. As far as my law degree, the reason I pursued that was because I was a big fan of Perry Mason, and I thought it was going to be like that, and it wasn't. And law school is difficult, but it's really difficult the first year. After the first year, if you can get through that first year, then you can go through it pretty much. And that's why I say your undergrad is, I found to be the hardest. It's the first time you were away and you really, it's new. After that, you know.
And you also mentioned you had some struggles in high school as well, particularly with a Spanish class.
No, in high school, no, I took Latin in
Latin.
in high school. I had, my struggles in high school were algebra. I couldn't.
Me too.
If I had to take a test to get into college, that there was something about taking algebra or math, I never would have graduated. I never would have graduated.
So, luckily, most likely, luckily for you, since algebra was not your strong suit, you found a career in journalism.
Mm-hmm.
So, can you share with us what it was about journalism that made you want to pursue that career?
Actually, I didn't want to pursue a journalism career. I was a writer. And as I say in my book, at the time, it was back in the early 60s. I went to college in 1962. And at that time, most Black women were either teachers or nurses. That's what they were majoring in. And I didn't want something like that to fall back on. So I said, since I'm a writer, I'll major in journalism, but what I really wanted to be was an advertising copywriter. And so advertising was my minor, and journalism was my fallback. And that's one of the reasons in the book I say, when they put me in radio and television, that's not what I was looking for. I wanted to be, and still want to be, and have been, an advertising copywriter.
Right. And now today I'm speaking to you as the author. So can you tell us about how this book came to reality and what was your process for bringing this book together?
Okay, I started this book right after I got out of the LA County Jail in 1998. I was actually in rehab, and it wasn't drugs. So I had had some horrible experiences, and I wanted them to be fresh. So I started the book in 1998 in Los Angeles, in rehab, and I finished the book in 2021 during the pandemic. Now, in my mind, I had finished the book about 3 different times. I had finished it in 2010, I had finished it in 2013. There was another time I thought I finished it. I had written it as fiction, I wrote it as a screenplay, I wrote it in every possible form. Most of the time because I was trying to avoid the truth of the story,
Right.
which was the betrayal by my mother and the fact that my mentor, whom I admired so, was actually a predator.
Absolutely.
So it took years for me to actually figure it all out. And by 2021, I figured it out, and that's the book you have now.
Well, I would say that I appreciate, the book that you've been able to give us. A lot of times, across many industries, women who are seeking opportunity get taken advantage of, and in many ways, their stories don't get shared for many reasons. And so, as we are able to, share our experiences, we're able to make our community stronger.
Mm-hmm.
And so, with that, we're gonna have you read part of the book.
Okay.
So, if you would just like to, just like flip to any chapter, any section that you would feel.
I actually have some sections.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. As I said, the book took a lot of introspection and a great deal of time. And by the time I got to the point where I was actually going to publish the book, it required courage, because I don't look good in this book at all, as you will see. And what gave me the courage to actually publish the book was Toni Morrison. And she said, "Is there no content for our lives? No song, no literature, no poem full of vitamins, no history connected to experience that you can pass along to help us start strong? You are an adult, the old one, the wise one. Stop thinking of saving face. Think of our lives and tell us your particularized world. Make up a story. Narrative is radical. For our sake and yours, forget your name in the street. Tell us what the world has been to you, in the dark places and in the light." Toni Morrison, The Nobel Lecture in Literature, 1993. Chapter 1. When I first came to New York in the late 60s, I was walking on West 89th Street between Columbus and Central Park West, the street where I lived, when a young Hasidic man approached me. He grabbed me and tried to literally take me off with him. As I struggled to get away, he told me if I went with him, he would give me diamonds. I pulled out of his grasp and ran home. A few years later, another man saw me, and he also wanted me. He told me he saw me as a diamond in the rough. But unlike my young Hasidic friend, he had the power to carry me off with him. This is the story of that man and me. It is relevant now because it's a Me Too story from someone who, though unwilling, was complicit. Not at first. That took years of grooming and objects that sparkled even brighter than diamonds. It is a story I had not heard before, and it may not be unique. I worked with many of the broadcast journalists you know today when we were all just starting out. Andrea Mitchell, Charlie Rose, Maria Shriver, Janet Langhart. They were my contemporaries. Andrea and I were friends. We sat next to each other as reporters at KYW All News Radio in Philly, circa 1969. I got put on TV before her. Charlie Rose was supposed to do background research for me when I was the action reporter at WPIX-TV in New York, circa 1973. Maria Shriver was my producer on Evening Magazine in Philly when I co-hosted the show, circa 1978. I mention these names to let you know I was in the big game with the real players, not that I knew it at the time. So how could I know how serious a game it was, how high the stakes, and that it would consume me for the rest of my life? You don't know my name because I couldn't play the hand I was dealt, although you'll see how hard I tried. I get no joy in telling this story. It has taken over 20 years of painful and unwanted introspection. But I wrote it for ordinary colored girls like me, who are as good as anyone, regardless of what the world is telling them. Let's start at the beginning. I was born February 5th, 1945 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. West Philly to be exact, in a detached brownstone row house. My daddy was rich and my mom was good looking. He was touted as one of the wealthiest and most successful Black realtors in the city, with offices in South Philly, Hotel Lorenzo in Atlantic City across the street from the famed Club Harlem, the Kentucky and Arctic, and apartment buildings and for sale signs on houses sprinkled throughout Black Philadelphia. My father was an older man and had married for the first time late in life to the lovely Laura Elizabeth Blakey. Poor but beautiful, she was light-skinned with a keen, narrow nose, beauty-marked accented mouth, dark eyes, and glossy black hair. Lovely to look at by any standard. He, Jackie Robinson, handsome with an athlete's physique and wavy black and gray hair. They made a striking couple. I was small for my age, chocolate brown with kinky hair, too brown for the standard of beauty in color-conscious Philadelphia. If you're white, you're all right. If you're yellow, you're mellow. If you're brown, stick around. If you're black, get back. My brown was too dark to be fashionable. I did not pass the paper bag test. the color you could be no darker than to enter some churches and be admitted to some clubs. Nor was it the creamy caramel, still highly valued as a hallmark of beauty in the Black community. And just as now, successful Black men often seek light or white brides, as they did in those days, not brown-skinned, kinky-haired girls like me. In fact, the world I grew up in, beauty was completely defined by a white standard. The closer you were to it in complexion and hair grade, the lovelier you were considered. You could have a nose like a pig and bug eyes, but if you were light-skinned with some silk in your hair, you would be considered a beauty compared to a lovely dark brown-skinned girl with African hair. Quite simply, unlike my mother, I would never be considered lovely, no matter how comely my features. Exacerbating that reality, from the age of 3, I grew up in Jack and Jill. Jack and Jill is a civic cultural club for young people, 2 to 19, founded in Philadelphia in 1938. In the 40s, it spread nationwide with chapters all across the country, and it exists till this day. The club drew the elite of Black society, the professionals, doctors, lawyers, successful businessmen. You had to be voted in, and there were monthly meetings. A Jack and Jill picture of the members showed children who defied their African heritage. In fact, I showed a picture of Jack and Jillers to a nationalist Black friend of mine, and she would not believe the majority pictured were even Black. Out of about 40 children, there were only 2 dark brown-skinned girls, me and Nadia Ward, whose father was a doctor. Nadia took to wearing blue contact lenses and blonde extensions when she grew up. This to avoid being the dreaded, ordinary colored girl, with no physical features to lift her from the unattractiveness of negritude. Although the world did not think I was pretty, I thought I liked my looks, and unlike Nadia, embraced my appearance. I even tanned to get darker. I thought I was upset because I wasn't getting confirmation of my attractiveness. I was actually upset because I did not myself believe I was attractive. Nadia was being honest. She looked at herself and tried to approximate the standard of beauty by appropriation. I found my reality too inconvenient to accept. I couldn't even look at myself. I often made up in the semi-darkness and saw my skin color as the highly touted caramel complexion, which explained why I tanned it. It was a Jedi mind trick to justify the dark brown color I already was. I tanned my imagined skin color to the actual color I was, so I had the choice. That way it was not immutable, my fate. I was in control. I chose the chocolate brown color because I liked it, which I did. This resulted in my developing a conscious veneer of self-acceptance that belied the vacuum of self-abnegation that lay beneath the surface. So while I thought I was okay, I believed in my own unworthiness in matters involving beauty, which created this vacuum, this black hole of longing, which I did not know existed. This was an Achilles heel that I was unaware of that would have apocalyptic consequences for me in the future. I wanted desperately to be a daddy's girl, but he had no time for me, and I searched for that father figure all my life. My father's ultimate rejection came when I asked him to pick me out in a high school picture of my classmates. He picked one of the most unattractive Black girls in the class, who later became a man. All of this to say, nothing in my upbringing led me to think of myself as desirable. I was a little girl and remained one long into my teens. I still asked for a doll on my 16th birthday and moved through a series of girlfriends as they matured faster than I did. Before I leave my childhood, I must discuss some incidents that were important to the woman I would become. When I was young, perhaps 3 or 4, I was with my mother, who was cleaning the living room, and saw transparent green leprechauns, 2 of them, moving the furniture and helping her clean. I didn't know if they were real or not, but I knew enough to know not to mention them to a living soul until this very moment, approximately 70 years later. The reason is, of course, because it sounds crazy. Now that I have been locked up more than once in mental institutions, it's no longer a speculation, so I can talk about it. In 1962, as President Kennedy was sending federal troops to Mississippi so James Meredith could integrate the University of Mississippi, I headed off to Michigan State University in East Lansing. College was a blast. Michigan State had a sprawling, beautiful campus with about 3,500 students. There were about 300 to 500 blacks, and we were like a segregated microcosm within the student body when it came to social life. It was a party school. It was a Big Ten school, and the star athletes in football, basketball, and track were black. I studied hard all my life, but after making the dean's list my first year without too much effort, I turned my attention to partying. As I said, Mother hadn't gone to college, but found herself in a group of women who did. She told me, "Theresa, join a sorority. Those women will be your friends all of your life." So I did, Alpha Kappa Alpha. I loved sorority life, and in short order, I was elected pledge trainer and bacillus president twice. My mother said she didn't know how she had the nerve to send me to college, as she taught me nothing about men, life, or sex. In fact, she had only said one thing to me about that subject: men are animals, Theresa. I dedicated the last 3 years of college to Greek intrigue and having fun. My goal in life became learning the Boston monkey, a dance where you shot your bottom out in jerky movements rather than sticking it in, as I'd been taught. There were constant parties, picnics, trips to Detroit. There was the Cuban Missile Crisis, when we all thought we were going up in a nuclear holocaust. The assassination of President Kennedy, which broke everyone's heart. The rise of Malcolm X, who actually spoke on campus. The 1965 passage of the Civil Rights Act. The Motown Review on campus with a young, smooth, and deliriously handsome Marvin Gaye, before he became tortured. The Beatles, the British invasion, then it was 1966, and I graduated. I was the only Black journalism graduate out of hundreds of students in the School of Communication Arts. I minored in advertising. My dream, to be an advertising copywriter. I broke out in sweats when I saw a good ad, and I still do. One day when Mother and I were relaxing on her bed, she sat bolt upright and said, "Be somebody, Theresa." I knew it was up to me to restore the family name. The business was in rubble, and Mother was scraping by at Ma Bell. Raised as a princess, I had no kingdom. I was just an ordinary colored girl living in West Philadelphia when anyone with any means had left there already and lived in Germantown, Bala Cynwyd, or Haddonfield, New Jersey. Even though she desperately needed the money I gave her, we decided it was time for me to seek my destiny in New York. So in the summer of 1967, I went to live in the Bronx with a distant relative from Trinidad. She was nice enough, but the Bronx was a far cry in distance from Manhattan. Plus, I was poor, and since I only paid room, not board, I would go to bed hungry every night, tortured by the aromas of her Caribbean cooking wafting into my room. Through the want-ads, I got a job at Gimbel's department store in the advertising department. It was an entry-level position. I was sending any extra money home. I was still living in the Bronx when I got a job at Ebony Magazine, the premier Black magazine. My minister, a family friend, referred me. Soon after, I moved to Upper West Side, 46 West 89th, between Columbus and Central Park West. I got a roommate, a soror and friend who had just graduated, Dinah Robinson. Now I was a true New Yorker. I was the assistant merchandising coordinator. My duties included writing the merchandising newsletter. Before I moved out of my brownstone on West 89th, my consciousness was severed by the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Then Bobby Kennedy was killed. I was numb, but I still had work to do. I had to figure out a way to make some impact on the apple. I didn't have any idea how to do it, but I knew it must be done. When my mother, who had sacrificed so much for me, said, "Be somebody," my silent reply was, "I will." Okay, this talks about my being a copywriter, and I'm moving on to get another job at Westinghouse. And I set up an appointment to meet the gentleman who's going to interview me, George Norford. We met in a classy midtown restaurant. Norford was a brown-skinned, broad-featured, middle-aged man. He explained to me that I'd be working as a trade press representative for Group W. The W stood for Westinghouse. Group W was part of the leisure time division of General Electric, the parent company. Group W owned 5 television stations and 7 radio stations in major markets. My job would be to write press releases and compile press kits about the programming generated by the group. Placement of articles was directed at the trade press, such as Variety, The Hollywood Reporter. It was a form of journalism, and I felt I could do it. Mr. Norford told me I would have to interview with the CEO or chairman of the board. I don't remember his exact title. Donald McGann. The day that changed my life at Group W was quite innocuous, and at the time, I had no idea the tide had shifted, and I was about to be swept away by a wave that would toss me mercilessly while I fought for my moorings. It was a meeting in the conference room. Some top executives were there, and promotion managers, among others, from Group W stations. Because I really wasn't concerned and thought it didn't concern me, I paid no attention to who was what or did what, their titles, local fiefdoms, who answered to whom. The power structure, the politics of the office were completely off my grid. If it didn't concern a press release, it didn't concern me. I made some objection to something that was said about Black people at the meeting. Not knowing your place or whom you're talking to makes you bold and self-assured. And then, sometime during the meeting, I heard this voice. It was deep and riveting. It was quite simply beautiful. After the meeting, I walked up to the man with the voice. He was tall, 6'6" or 7", tanned with crinkly black hair. To me, he looked like a dark Laurence Olivier. He wore black rimmed glasses and a boxy black pinstripe suit. His lips were thin, his gaze direct. Because of the tan and the hair, I didn't see him as a white man. I looked up and straight into his eyes. "You have the most beautiful voice I've ever heard," I said. I swear I saw his aura. He was suffused in a white light. "If I make you a star, will you remember me?" he asked. "Maybe I will, and maybe I won't," I taunted. I turned with a flip of my mini and walked away. If this were a film, I'd freeze frame that scene, stop in my tracks, break the fourth wall, and look straight into the camera, because this is the moment that changed the course of my life forever. Remember in The Wizard of Oz when Dorothy goes from her drab world in Kansas to the Technicolor Oz, filled with all manner of strange, unusual anomalies? At that moment, my life made the opposite switch from a Technicolor fantasy to a film noir. Film noirs are quite literally dark films, shot in black and white, with shadows denoting foreboding. The protagonist is often conflicted and doomed, and often comes to a bad end. Think Edmund O'Brien in Dead on Arrival, DOA. Now, what he was saying to me was, if I make you a star, will you suck my dick when you're 35? But you can't actually say that. Did I know what he meant? On some level? Of course I did. But I was 24 and completely out of my depth. Sexual harassment had not been defined or acknowledged. I thought I was talking to Baby Luke or St. Pete at MSU Student Union. Maybe I will and maybe I won't. My clever repartee. Little did I know I'd made a pact with the devil. Joel Chaseman was the man with the voice. A few days later, I encountered him in the morning on the elevator at work. As we got off, he said, people would think we came in together. I wouldn't mind. I had no response to that, but I didn't think anything of it. Soon after that, Quentin, he was my boss, Quentin's whole attitude toward me changed. He was no longer affable and flirty. He was strictly business. One day he called me into his office. He said, there's an excellent opportunity for you at KYW Radio in Philadelphia. That was one of the 7 radio stations owned by Group W. You'll be the consumer reporter. Say what? Philadelphia, radio. I didn't want to go back home. I sacrificed the job I loved to get to Manhattan. I was deliriously happy, and I certainly didn't want to do radio. When I expressed this to Quentin, he was intractable. Someone very high up in the company wants you to have this opportunity, he said, and if you don't take it, you won't have a job here. Wow, it was a fait accompli. They were going to take away my livelihood if I didn't take the job. I didn't know who initiated this move, and surprisingly, I never thought to even ask. I was not ambitious or business savvy. I was a little worker bee, simply happy to have a writing job in a Manhattan office. This was all beyond me. I was hurt and confused. Joel Chaseman never crossed my mind. I didn't even know what his title was. Interestingly, though, whenever he ventured into our office area, Ronnie Chef, my wheat-haired, sophisticated Jewish secretary, would turn up her nose in disgust. I did not want to be a broadcaster or a reporter for that matter. It involved too much public interaction, and I knew in my gut this would not be good for my psyche. The fact that I wasn't wanted at KYW All News Radio was the least of my problems, but I settled into the reporter's room and went about the task of being the station's consumer reporter, establishing the consumer desk. The broadcasters, all white men with melodious voices, sat in a large room around a big table and read rewritten wire copy from the AP and UPI wires. The reporters sat in a glass-enclosed long table in front of it. I sat next to City Hall reporter Andrea Mitchell. Andrea is now the NBC News chief foreign affairs correspondent. Now a blonde married to Alan Greenspan. She was then an earthy, long-haired brunette who was married to a black man, Gil. We became good friends, the only reporter friend I ever made in broadcasting. I attended her upscale wedding. I got notes from executives in New York congratulating my work, most notably Joel. He'd sent handwritten glowing messages about how my work was warm and wonderful. He encouraged my communicating with him. He wanted to know the details of my life. I was flattered and drawn to him. I loved the attention. The station built its entire advertising campaign around me. A large picture of my face with me peeping over my signature oversized glasses filled the front window of the station. The logo read, Theresa Brown sticks her nose, Knows, in other people's business. 500,000 brown paper bags were distributed in grocery stores with a caricature of my face on them. There were strip ads and magazine articles about me. Surprisingly, it never occurred to me at the time that this was all Joel's doing. He had brought me into his turf and made me the focus of his kingdom. We're coming to the end. Then came the big student reporter dinner. I was chosen as the keynote speaker. Joel Chaseman was there. I didn't know exactly what his title was. It was a warm summer evening, and Joel came up to me after the event and said he'd walk me home. I remember how soft the night air was, and even what I was wearing. a ballerina-length lime green dress festooned with big red cherries and black suede Joan Crawford buckney pumps. To my amazement, he walked me right to my apartment door. I guess the outfit was too much for him, the cherries, the shoes, because at the door, he grabbed my buttocks, pulled me to him, and kissed me on the mouth, hard. I fumbled with my key and went inside. I almost had a heart attack. I was borderline hysterical. Hyperventilating, I called my mother. Mommy, I gasped. Joel just walked me home and he grabbed me and kissed me. Theresa, he called today. He said you were his protege. Calm down. What? Joel chased me and called my mother. They had discussed his plans for me and she hadn't even bothered to tell me and call me. And whatever he said to her made her all right with his sexual advances. I was clearly traumatized, and she was normalizing the incident, smoothing it over. My little mom was pimping me out. We talked a long time. This went against everything I believed that had been taught. She didn't use the words, but my mother wanted me to be a whore, plain and simple. Two people whom I revered were telling me this was the price of fame. This is the gold ring, girl. You better grab it if you know what's good for you. I think my brain split into warring factions during that conversation. I knew what was right, but I didn't want to disappoint my mom, and I did like and respect Joel, who had become the father I was searching for. As soon as I hung up, the phone rang. It was Joel. Who are you talking to? He said. My mother, I said. He seemed pleased, and we got off the phone. When the two authority figures in my life, Mother and Joel, implied that sex with the boss was not only acceptable, but advisable, I knew it was wrong. What I did not know was what a catastrophic effect this betrayal of my beliefs would have on me. The innuendo had not only blown my mind, but it had sabotaged my soul. They had caused a moral injury. I could not know at the time that this had happened because in 1969, MI, moral injury, was not even identified. It was not defined until 1984. I didn't learn of it until 2019, and by that time, I had unknowingly suffered 50 years of its consequences. One definition of moral injury is the damage done to the soul of an individual stemming from the betrayal of what's right, either by a person in legitimate authority or by oneself. The result is a constellation of psychological, behavioral, and social, and sometimes spiritual responses to this breach. It is reminiscent of PTSD, but it can affect anyone with a moral compass. It exposes an individual's vulnerabilities, and although it does not cause mental illness, it can trigger pre-existing conditions. Addiction, depression, family alienation, loss of faith, a broken heart are all fallouts from moral injury. I did not know when I went to sleep that night that I would wake up profoundly changed. My moral compass had been sprung, and I was being directed on a path to destruction.
Let's clap it up for the meeting and probably start. So, with the idea of moral injuries, that's something that you talk about a lot in your book. Could you talk to us about like how one can recover from a moral injury? A moral injury is not a physical injury where if you ice it or if you just give it time, it will heal itself. There are things that you have to intentionally do, like self-care, and you got to work through that moral dilemma that caused that injury. So could you just share with us like your experience with like combating and recovering from like the idea of a moral injury?
Well, what's interesting is that someone I had critiquing this book, or another writer, when I was writing, after he read it, he said, what's the most important thing that you want to get across in this book? Why did you write this book? Excuse me. I said moral injury. He said, well, you better rewrite the book because you never get a clue that there's. So I'm so grateful that you said, you know, I keep bringing it up again and again because I rarely read the book, but I had to read it again. I said, I keep talking about moral injury. I would say, to me, the biggest way that I was able to heal it was identifying it. The biggest thing, and that's why it's so important for me to tell people about moral injury, because the big thing to me was I knew I was doing something wrong. You know when you're doing something wrong. But what I had no idea, and my big message is, you know, they say karma, but you pay for those things in real time. Yeah. I had no idea that being complicit in a sexual way, being betrayed by authority figures would affect me physically. And it affected me with addictions. It did break my heart. When you know you have a broken heart, you have no joy. From the time this started in the 60s, when I had my first breakdown after some interaction with Joel, I don't even remember what it was now. It was a physical breakdown that was triggered by moral injury. So, and when you know you have a broken heart, you have no joy. Oh, I know the point I was making. From that time in the late 60s, I always wished I was dead. I wished and I've been very happy. And I used to say, the only reason I'm glad I'm still alive is because I can take care of my mother. And that's how profound it is. It's not so much how you cure it, but what it does to you. Addiction, family alienation, broken heart, if you have some underlying mental issues, it can trigger those. When you read about how to cure it, they say self-introspection, psychiatry, self-care, like you said. For me, journaling, which I would do anyway because I'm a writer, for me, realizing what had happened to me was the biggest cure. And then going back and seeing how it affected me, and that in itself was, but of course, it had been like 50 years later, so, you know, I was ready for a cure, but yes, that's what I did.
Well, I always say better late than never.
Yes,
so.
That's very true.
So bringing me to my next question. When you really study like these cases of sexual harassment, you begin to realize that in a lot of times it occurs when the person, their back is against the wall. So for you, you know, you had found a job that you liked in New York, and you had created your own path, and then all of a sudden, when you don't even really realize it, you are sent down a different path, a path that isn't really easy to jump off of. You were asked to take a new job, new position, or lose your livelihood, and then you take that new job, and then you're built up in a way that, you know, you're creating, you know, like momentum for yourself. You're creating a name for yourself. You know, you have your face in advertisement, and you know you're experiencing all this success, and then it becomes a situation where, okay, if I want to continue this success that I've built up for myself, I have to put my well-being in the hands of others. This was during an era before the Me Too movement was talked about or a thing.
There was no concept of harassment. Exactly. It didn't exist. Exactly. This is what happened when you went into the workplace.
Right. So do you think that now, in today's society, with the Me Too movement and with social media, and now everybody kind of has definitely a better understanding of that moral, you know, wrongdoing that could occur in these situations, do you think that there is a way to still, like, for women to create their own paths, And like how does that look? You know, like just trailblazing your own path and
I know what you're saying. What I think is, first of all, as long as it's sex, money, and power, you're going to have men and women, depending on what sexuality is involved, using that. There's always going to be a casting couch. I thought I was going into a legitimate business, and I didn't think it was like Hollywood, so it never occurred to me that they were being. But as long as you have power, men or women with power, and that, and you can get sex from somebody to promise, you're always going to have that. Now, the only difference now is women are aware. There's some women who will want to play the game because it is very strong, and men run into it too, you know. I think it's changed because women are aware of things now. I think men or people in power will always try to use the game. I think the only thing now is that people are aware of what's going on and that they can, if they want to threaten their job, or they can go to HR or whatever and complain. It's still very, very difficult. And as he taught, you know, I used to, how can you do this to me? You know, you have daughters. And and I thought we were friends, but he would say to me, you know, it's my word, your word against mine, you know, period, God, you know, that's what, and who is going to believe you? Plus the fact that although Tarana Burke, a black woman, founded the Me Too movement, just like everything else, a black woman's Me Too story is like nobody, the same black writer whom you would know said to me, when it happens to black women, so what?
Right.
You know, so what?
Excuse me. I'm sorry. Excuse me. Did anyone park in this parking lot next door?
Yes.
If you did, you have to move your car because they're gonna lock the parking gate.
Thank you.
Exactly. Yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you.
But just going back to what you were saying, it all really boils back down to the idea of this white beauty standard. That's another theme that is repetitive in your book. And so with the idea of black women trying to either combat or live up to or assimilate to this white beauty standard, there's this feeling that it's never enough. It's like an unachievable dream. So in what you were saying with how a black woman's Me Too story is
Not relevant. As in, people don't care. I mean, I'm not just saying that from my experience. I'm saying that from research, and you know, that's the story. It's just like when I was about to go to, when I was in jail in LA, and my lawyer told me we have to get a bench trial because black women are always convicted in LA. You know, that sort of thing. It's like, wow. Thank you.
I got you. So, with this book, do you feel like writing the book, obviously over a long period of time, when you released it, was there a sense of completion? Was there a sense of, you know, just coming to a point where, okay, it's been compartmentalized into a book, it's a story, and now I can either remove myself from it, move on from it, or what was your feeling when you finally, for the third time, completed the book?
You're very insightful, Isaac, and obviously you're going to be very successful, very intelligent. Yeah, there was a sense of completion and moving on. Absolutely. And not really, I did the audiobook, and when I did the audiobook, I said, I'll never open this book again, which I had to for this event, to read it, to see what it was. And now I'm focused on the screenplay, which will be a film noir.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's very consistent, and wow, I can already like vision it. So are you going to start it off in like live color, like
No, it's a
Wizard
film
of
noir,
Oz?
it's black and white.
Okay, that's amazing. So since your release of the book, what has been the publicity surrounding the project? Have you done a lot of events like this where you can talk about
I've done one other event. This may be my last event. It's not like people are calling for the event. And yeah, no, I have not. And so I'm moving on. Hopefully, the movie will be more appreciated.
Right. So that's If I Make You a Star. Was it easy coming up with the title?
No, that was very hard. One of the hardest things, because I had lots of title, Against All Odds, At Any Cost. There were many titles, and I was working in one of my. It took a long time for me to retire. I was working in one of my retirement jobs at the Junior League. And I came up with If I Make You a Star. And I found out from one of my artist friends that's, I didn't even know it at the time, but that's the common come on. You know,
Yeah.
I can make you a star, if I make you a star. But the interesting thing, at least this guy actually could make you a star. Like a lot of these guys, they can't do anything for you, but they will say, if I can make you a star. But he really could make me a star.
And that just goes back to what I was saying at the very beginning, is just how a lot of the instances of these Me Too situations are very different, but they have very similar, details to them. And so I that's why I appreciate, you sharing your story and, you speaking out about, your experiences, because, you mentioned that part of your inspiration to write this book was for Toni Morrison. But, sometime in the future, someone can be inspired by Theresa Brown.
Thank you. I hope so.
I hope so too, because I would definitely recommend this book to everyone. I would want my daughter, my sister, and my mother to read this book. But I also want to just address the men in the room. It's important for us to be aware of these topics as well. Because you did mention in your book how you had a knight in shining armor. Your late husband kind of, was there for you when you were a damsel in distress in some ways.
He said, if I hadn't had Mr. Crenshaw, I wouldn't be sitting here now. I'd still be in the LA County Jail. That's where I would be. I would be someone's paramour in the LA County Jail if it were not for Mr. Crenshaw.
Well, if that were the case, we would start a free tour.
It's funny you should say that, because during my court case, I had put together a tape. I was trying to get back into TV, and it became the Free Theresa Brown tape to get me, out of the felony.
Right. Well, I'm glad that you're free today. And I also just want to go back into addressing the men in the room. I know you guys see the shirt. It's very important that we protect Black women at all costs. Without Black women, we wouldn't be really here around. We need Black women, and they're the backbone to our backbone, and they do so much, both seen and unseen, heard and unheard, and it's just part of our culture, and our sacred duty to protect our sisters. So definitely want to just make sure that that's been stated very clearly. But yeah, if we can, just thank Ms. Brown for sharing her book and her experiences. We're going to open up with a Q&A for the audience. If anyone would like to just ask any questions, you can just raise your hand. And if not, I would just, okay, you got some hands?
First of all, I'm thankful for your book.
My dog ate my hearing aids, and I'm definitely.
I'm thankful for your book.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
I was a speech and mass communications undergrad. Radio and television.
Uh-huh.
I'm thankful because, one, not just because I was a double graduate from the University of the District of Columbia after I got here, right? You're going to law school. There's some other things that I wanted to ask. How did that equip you to come to resolution, to come on out with the book?
Not at all. My law school experience really had no impact on me at all in any way, except that it was hard, it was interesting. I didn't want to be a lawyer. I took the bar twice. I couldn't pass it. I didn't care. I couldn't study. I was so burned out after law school. It had no impact on anything in my life.
It's very interesting. I'm actually thinking about doing law school. So
Oh no, that's just me. That was just me.
No,
You know,
it's too late.
I would recommend it. I would recommend a law school education to any. I really was just looking for another career. And a girlfriend was a Supreme Court judge, and she recommended it. I thought, oh well, why not? But I had no interest. I don't have the brain for it. It's not my thing. You know, I'm a creative person. But I loved the experience. I thought the school was excellent. I loved the professors. I got an excellent education. It's just, it wasn't for me.
And so you attended law school at UDC?
Yeah, David A. Clark School of Law.
Nice. I had spent time interning at UDC. I was teaching high school students data analytics, and I wasn't aware of the history of UDC. Coming from King of Prussia, I wasn't exposed to it until I had done work with them. And UDC is an amazing school. It's continuing to grow. It's continuing to just upgrade itself in many numerous ways. And I know we have some people in here that have experience with UDC as well. Pablo Oduna speaks there a lot. Did you attend UDC at all?
In addition, yes, to answer you, but the main reason that when I came here, it's not about me. It only cost $16 a credit.
Wow.
And I told people, I don't know what these chucks in DC are doing. I enrolled to get 2 undergraduate degrees after I had one. But when I was listening to your narrative, I'm an athlete, okay? And so all athletes to some degree or another are performing artists.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was hearing you say something about, I'm gonna make a star of you, right? They told some of us a similar thing.
Mm-hmm.
In another kind of a way, but it's a very interesting how that power, sex, and money.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just listening, and but it's a very, very, very interesting dynamic. Do you see this particular book here? It would be more for what age group?
I would say young women. I wrote it for young women, all women, but Black women in particular, darker Black women specifically. Did you have a question just because your outfit
Yes, I did have a question.
fascinates me?
Oh, thank you. But yeah, so your title of your book speaks a lot about like power and just the relationship that like your boss, your mentor had towards you. And I'm just wondering, like, being affected by that power and being so close to it and experiencing like the effects of it, like, do you feel like you have an understanding or like any ideas of how to find alternatives to that power and dismantle that power, especially when it comes to like in the journalism or broadcasting space?
I'm not exactly sure what you mean. How I would have, like, being close to that power, the most important thing I realized, seeing that kind of power, is how much it impacts everybody. People you don't think it will impact. Like, I worked with Julian Bond, and he had been a Jack and Joner, and we struck up a relationship, not a relationship, but a friendship. And after I was blacklisted by Joel, and we were at some big event, and Julian was there, and I went to say hello to him. Nothing, just like stopped me in my tracks. the main thing I found was how willing people are to accede to power, give in to power, do whatever power says. Men, women, more than I ever expected. Is that, but other than that, there was another, I'm not sure what you meant.
So
beyond
basically,
that.
like, with that experience that you have, like, do you feel like that gives you an idea of, like, how to dismantle that power, or if there's any alternatives to being in the broadcasting and journalism world?
How to do, that's the thing, that's what I don't understand, how to do what with the, how to dismantle it?
Yeah.
Any idea?
Yeah.
Well, this is my idea. This is how I dismantled it. Okay? And this is the only way, in my position, I knew how to dismantle it. The victim who is able to articulate the situation of the victim has ceased to be a victim. She has become a threat. James Baldwin. So writing this book was my way of dismantling the power. Because Joel died in just a year or so ago at 93. But the people who are in the business know him, and his relatives and children know him, and he's exposed to be a person of dubious character, if not a complete predator. So, as I said in the book, there are women before me who never had the opportunity to at least point to their abuser. And the most important thing when you've been abused, psychologically, mentally, is accountability. That someone's accountable. That at least you can say, well, you know, and that was my way of dismantling power.
No, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
No. Could you come closer, because I am there.
Oh.
You're almost in pink and green, you're in blue and green.
Yeah, so my question is, thank you so much again for sharing your experience, and I know a lot of women will benefit from that. My question to you is, even though there's more women coming out and sharing the problems that they have been through, that they're being abused, and they're empowering more women, there's still a large fraction of us that are not able to do that, because by the end of the day, the society still tend to punish. There's more consequences for you as a woman, even though you are the victim. What kind of internal dialogue did you have with yourself to give yourself the courage to be able to write the book and speak?
Well, actually, it's sad to say, I hate to say this, but I would say until 2014, okay? I was still believing, even with everything if you read the book, or even with all the horrible things that he had done to me, even with everything that had happened, I still believed, well, maybe it's because, he really liked me and he was hurt because I did X, Y, and Z. And I never used his name. I wrote it in all those different ways to avoid using his name, because it's like a cult, That's how much I revered him. I didn't want him to look bad. I didn't care that I looked bad. My mother, I adored my mother. I did anything my mother, we all looked bad, but I didn't want him to look bad. And what finally gave me the courage was my husband had a bust done. And I never thought I was attractive. And one day I looked at the bust and I thought the bust was beautiful. And I looked at my wedding picture, and in a split second I thought, oh, I really was a pretty girl. So F him, I was a pretty girl. And I went through all this thinking he was doing me favors, and just like that, his power over me dissipated. Just like that, just like in the movies. And that's why I say in the book, beauty killed the beast. And that's what gave me the courage. Finally loving myself. You know, and when they say that, learning to love yourself is the greatest love of all. And the important thing to me about this book was I thought I did love myself, I thought I was on top of everything I had. I was so confident I didn't need to compete. I was always at the top of my game. It's those underlying things in your psyche and in your character that you don't know about that will bring you down, I thought I was good enough, but I didn't. And that was the key. And that was his key to me, that I thought he was doing me this incredible, he chose me, nobody chose, So that's what gave me the courage. Self-realization, self-actualization. But to actually put it down, because when you read it, I look really bad. I didn't say I was a bad girl. But what actually gave me the courage, because right before I published it, I had said, I'm only going to take notes from my editor, and I had a girlfriend I trusted. My editor excoriated me, when he read the line, just ripped me up. So I called my girlfriend, and I told her, and I was so upset, and I thought she was going to say, Theresa, it's a... And she said, you didn't write this book to be a bestseller. If you want something to hold in your hand, the guy I'm dating, he binds his own books. And so I thought, wow, she doesn't think it's worth it either. And I cried all day, and I wasn't going to publish it. And then I went back and read Toni Morrison, and she said, forget your name in the street. And that's what gave me the courage.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
May I ask a peak and green question?
Certainly.
And was that from her 1988 book of Toni Morrison?
This quote?
No, that quote.
No. It's from her 1993
Okay.
speech when she got the Nobel Peace Prize.
Because I have that in hardbound copy of hers. Also, the pink and green question that I was going to ask was about Dr. Marjorie Holloman Parker. Marjorie Holloman Parker at one time was the
Supreme.
Yeah, whatever the Supreme. Mm-hmm. But the thing that I appreciated about her that I also read a book that she wrote on the AKAs, probably in '86 or so, and she also wrote a book on the links, because of her historical background. But to me, it was fascinating because women would tend to ask me, "Well, how do you know about this?" I said, because readers leave. I guess what I'm asking, my daughter happened to do 1999 Johnson Smith Peak and Green, and one of the most profound women at Howard University, in my estimation, Dr. Roberta McLeod. She ran the Blackburn Center for about probably 30 years. Hampton graduate, 63, Peak and Green. My coach's wife, who was since 1957, Peak and Green, Darling. And so, I'm not really off into that lane, but I kind of accept people what they do, not because they happen to be in colors, because I've had some very interesting experience with people with colors who actually would follow that model that you were talking about in that book. I'll just leave it at that.
I'm gonna have to get that Pink and Green book off of you too. I'm actually interested in that topic as well. Just want to learn more. There's this pretty girl that I kind of have a crush on. She's Pink and Green, so I just want to read out. She's good, yeah. So maybe after we could talk about how I could win her over. But we could take more questions.
Yes.
So you said something about he got to you because you weren't aware of your self-worth. And once you recognize your self-worth, essentially the game changed. So what advice would you have for young Black women who are going into the journalism industry who may not understand their self-worth on the level that they need to, so they don't get taken advantage of?
Oh, I'm sorry, say that so they might not.
what would your advice be to Black women who, like you, maybe think that they believe in themselves or love themselves enough, but turns out they have some unresolved issues with themselves?
Yeah, see that's everyone's own personal journey, because who knows? I mean, maybe all I can say is if you find that your paths are not taking you where you want to go, or you keep repeating the same mistake over and over again, or something keeps going wrong, stop and say, let me look at myself. Let me see if there's something wrong with me. That song, Lady Gaga, maybe you're maybe I'm the problem. We never think we're really the problem, and it's all a personal journey. And the only thing I can say is that try to examine yourself to see if you're not sabotaging yourself in some way you don't know. And of course, that's the conundrum. Well, if you don't know, how are you going to know that you're sabotaging it? But that's everyone's personal journey. Like in my mind, I had started to say, I'm working very hard, but things keep things keep getting worser and worser and worser. I'm blaming X, Y, and Z, and I'm blaming my mental illness. I didn't even know I was mentally ill. But at some point, if things aren't working out, just start looking to yourself. I know that's not as helpful as it could be, but.
I mean, it's helpful. That's real life.
You kind of answered the question I had just now, but I just want to ask it. So I work with kids, and I'm just wondering, like, what do you think, or do you have any advice on, like, how to promote or instill self-worth in young kids, young Black women, and like a non-paternalistic, like patronizing way?
The thing is, therein lies the rub. I had the kind of upbringing, we learned all about Black history. It was all, everybody in the house was upstanding. There was no cursing, smoking, drinking. I was told I was attractive. I was told it's the whole culture. It's the things to me that are the most damaging are the things that we're taking in by osmosis that we don't even know. The messages in the culture, in the air, that we can't protect ourselves from. And so I think one must educate children about the fact that you're living in a culture that does X, Y, and Z, and it may be impacting you. Tell them where they are and what's going on and what the general thinking is, and examine yourself to see if perhaps you picked up some of these biases and you don't even know it.
So you would say like cultural literacy? Cultural literacy, you would say?
Cultural
literacy.
Literacy?
Yeah.
What is that?
Like just understanding and being able to identify.
Yes, yeah, oh yeah, that makes sense. Cultural literacy, yes. That's an excellent question, by the way.
There's a book by the name of The Inward Journey by Howard Thurman. And some people remember Howard Thurman when he was at Howard University and Morehouse and all that. But he suggests to us that, as you stated, in a synonymic way, that we have to go within ourselves. And Howard Thurman talks about it in terms of, first, you have to saddle your dream. And then he talks about how not only do you have to saddle your dream, you have to put a bridle in your own mouth to speak to yourself. And that's those of us who have read Howard Thurman, and some of us met him 44 years ago at Founders Library, as well as the Rankin Chapel of 1902 of Howard University. But he talks heavily about the inward journey. No one, as you stated it, the inward journey. That's a personal kind of a journey that you have to do, but as you stated, the conundrum, that how can you know this? But it happens for some reason. Whatever you do to do that. I mean,
No, that's absolutely true.
So I would like to ask, like, for that inward journey, as you gain more life experience, is there ever a conclusion to that journey? Is there ever a point where you feel like you fully understand yourself, or do you still find yourself like discovering new things about you as you continue to live life?
Well, I think you get to a point, I remember in high school, someone said, "Oh, for one bright, shining moment of peace." And I have gotten to the point where I found the peace. And I feel I accomplished my major goal, because I'm a writer, so the major goal is write something. So I did. As far as you don't know what you don't know. So who knows what I'll know by the time I leave here. But I did get to a point where I felt a stopping point and oh yeah, okay, I got to here and I figured that much out.
Well, congratulations on achieving your major goal. That's definitely something that a writer sets out to do, is write, and you've done that beautifully.
Thank you.
So if anyone is interested in reading If I Make You a Star, you could go up to the front desk and place a special order. And,
I have copies too.
So we'll be able to distribute these books. Definitely important that the story is shared. It is an amazing story. The writing is amazing. It feels not like you're reading the story, but the story comes to you as a thought. And that's just a testament to
Comes
how
to you like a thought?
Yeah. When
Oh
I was reading it, it didn't feel like I was reading words. It felt like I was just thinking what you were thinking in those moments.
Oh, that's a beautiful compliment, Isaac.
Yeah,
Definitely, one of my favorite books that I've read recently. So just wanna again just thank you for coming out today. Thank you so much.
And if no one else has any more questions, we could just give Ms. Brown a round of applause.
Thank you so very much. Thank you. I appreciate it.
So with that,
I'll take the books up to the front.
okay. So yeah, if you guys are interested in the book, they'll be at the front. And thank you for coming. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Isaac, you're so wonderful. You can have a career in broadcasting if you wanted.
Maybe.
No,
We'll
it's
see.
like being an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
You have to deal with
We'll use-
people.